Rain struck the lonely road like knives upon an old wound. The rider pressed onward beneath his soaked cloak, the sound of hooves swallowed by endless thunder. Behind him, the world was a smear of shadow and memory. Before him, a black horizon without mercy. His horse snorted uneasily, eyes rolling at shapes unseen in the mist. The milestones crept by, each carved with the weary hand of some forgotten mason. Until the next read 666, the rider slowed. The wind stilled. From the fog came the faint scent of ash, and a whisper too near to be imagined. "You're next." The words hung in the air like frost. He turned, but the road was empty. Still, the air had weight now, as though something unseen had entered the saddle behind him. Who walked before dawn if no one survived the night? The road stretched on, swallowed by endless night. The storm had softened to a whisper, yet each drop struck like a warning. The rider's breath came in clouds of white as the fog thickened until it pressed close as a shroud. The wind carried voices now, fragments of prayers and cries too old to belong to the living. His horse faltered, nostrils flaring as the milestones began to repeat. 661, then 62, and again 61. Time had broken its own law. In the dark behind him, hooves echoed softly, perfectly in step with his own. He dared not look back. He spoke aloud to chase away the fear, but his own voice sounded borrowed, as though someone else answered with him. A low laughter trembled in the fog, thin, cruel, and near. The horse shuddered. Somewhere in the distance, a single bell tolled. Though no village lay within miles, the rider whispered a prayer half-remembered from childhood, the kind taught to keep the dead at bay. Yet, as the final word left his lips, the voice returned, quiet and cold. "You're next." The road widened into a valley, bordered by broken stones that once marked the gates of a forgotten hamlet. Charred beams jutted from the earth like ribs of a corpse. A rusted bell swung on a half-burned post, moving though no wind stirred it. The rider slowed, eyes searching for signs of life. Only ash, only silence. Then, a whisper passed beside his ear. Not from behind, but from within the air itself. The same words again, spoken with dreadful certainty. "You're next." His horse screamed and bolted through the ruins. He didn't stop until the world blurred into rain and night. When he finally slowed, the fog had thinned, revealing a faint lantern glow in the distance, a sign of shelter, or so he hoped. Yet as the light grew closer, it flickered not from flame, but from something burning cold blue, swaying like a soul's last breath. The rider's hand reached for the dagger at his belt. For a moment, all was still. Then from behind him, that same voice, closer now at his very ear, whispered, calm and certain, "I've been here all along." The rider rode until the lantern's glow vanished behind the folds of fog. His horse's breath came in ragged bursts, hooves sinking into sodden earth. Each gust of wind carried the same whisper, his name, though he never spoke it aloud. The road bent and straightened, but the cursed milestone appeared again on his left. He stared at it in disbelief. 666. The fog pulsed faintly, as though breathing. He dismounted, drawing his dagger. The steel reflected nothing. The silence that followed was total, thick enough to smother sound itself. Then, from the mist, the whisper came again. Not echoing, but answering. "I told you, rider. You're next." He mounted again, pressing the horse forward, desperate to outpace whatever followed. The air itself seemed to cling to him, a weight pressing against his chest. For every mile he rode, the whisper kept beside him, never louder, never fading. When he spoke to the wind, it answered in the same voice as his own. Panic clawed at him. The rein slipped from trembling fingers as visions bled through the fog. Faces of those he failed, eyes staring, mouths moving in silence. He bit his tongue to keep from screaming. tasting blood that felt colder than rain. The storm broke again with a sudden flash, revealing a narrow bridge of rotting planks over a stream swollen black with rain. He slowed the horse, cautious each step groaning under its weight. Beneath the bridge, he thought he saw movement. Pale fingers brushing the water's surface. A second flash of lightning revealed no one. Still, his heart pounded like a drum in a tomb. He looked down once more and saw his own reflection staring up, though his reflection smiled. The whisper returned, gentle this time, as though coaxing him to cross. "Come closer, rider. The road ends here." Beyond the bridge, the mist thinned, revealing the faint outline of a cottage half hidden beneath the slope of an old hill. Smoke rose from its chimney, curling in unnatural patterns, never breaking apart. The rider hesitated, but hunger and fear of the open road drove him forward. The horse resisted, stamping the ground and snorting. He whispered softly, calming the beast. Yet even as he approached, the shadows cast by the cottage windows bent the wrong way, stretching toward him instead of away. Something inside waited for him, listening. He dismounted and stepped toward the door. The hinges creaked open by themselves as though welcoming him. A single candle burned upon a wooden table within, though no one sat beside it. A steaming bowl of stew waited, untouched. The rider froze, rain dripping from his hood onto the earthen floor. The whisper now came from inside the house. "You've come far enough." His dagger slipped from his fingers and clattered to the ground. Behind him, the door closed softly, sealing him in with the unseen. The cottage was no home at all, only a waypoint to a larger hush. Beyond its back door lay a slope worn by cartwheels, and at the hill's foot stood an inn, with a broken sign and a bell that did not move. The rain eased to a thin mist that clung to the eaves like breath. He led the horse to the post and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, softer, as if not to wake the road itself. A bar slid aside and a single eye studied him through a crack. Warmth spilled out. Stew, wood smoke, the promise of a chair. He stepped in, and the door fell shut behind him with a careful hand, as if the night might notice. The hearth popped. The room felt old in a kind way, yet every shadow held its own small ear. He offered coin, and received silence first, then a nod, then bread. The bell above the lintel watched them both, like a judge, without a voice. He ate while the chair dried beneath him, each bite a small truce with the cold. The keeper poured a tin cup and watched the steam drift, measuring him without words. When he thanked her, she flinched at the sound, as if the walls might carry it outside. He asked about the road ahead, and her gaze slid to the bell above the door. It had no clapper. A cord hung from it, cut short and burned black. She spoke at last, quiet and plain. The mile behind him did not let go. Once it knew a heartbeat. She had seen riders circle back until their faces were strangers to themselves. He said little. He did not want to hear his fear spoken aloud. A draft slid under the door, and the candle flame bent toward the floor like a bow to something unseen. Night settled like a lid. Wind scraped across the shutters, then faded. He dozed by the hearth with boots still on, telling himself it was only for a moment. In the stillness, small sounds grew large. Wood ticking in the heat, a dish settling on a shelf, his own breath counting the dark. From the lintel, the bell gave a single clear note. Impossible. It had no tongue. He sat up straight, heart pounding against his ribs. The keeper's chair scraped in the next room. She whispered a prayer no louder than soot. The bell chimed again, not struck from within the room, but answered from somewhere out on the road, as though another bell replied from the mile he had fled. The horses in the shed stamped and snorted. The flame in the hearth leaned toward the door. "Shores, medicine no mess in no change. Lord the crawl. Shadow I don't see it." The latch twitched without a hand upon it. Smoke thinned from the hearth and drew in a long ribbon toward the gap beneath the door, then slid back across the floor like a living draft. It crept around chair legs and over his boots. a slow, patient tide seeking shape. He lifted the poker and felt foolish until the smoke rose and stood where a person might stand. No face, only the hint of one when the fire cracked. It leaned close, and the room cooled with it. A whisper touched the inside of his ear without crossing the space between them. The words were the same as before, but now they carried a small smile he could not see. He glanced to the keeper and found her already watching him, as if she heard a different sentence meant only for her. The bell rang a third time, sweet and cruel, and the door swung wide to show only black rain. The smoke figure gave no step yet, came nearer, as if the space itself shortened for it. He spoke into the cold, telling the dark that the road would take him anyway, that he had miles left and a duty he could not drop. The whisper answered with a truth that cut. Duty is only another word for chains. The keeper doused the candle with wet fingers, and the room fell to coals and breath. Through the open door, the night leaned in, carrying the distant sound of hooves coming closer in a circle that never ended. He felt a weight settle behind his shoulder, as if a second rider had climbed onto him without touch. The hearth sighed, and the bell fell silent, as though it had delivered its verdict. Dawn came gray and reluctant, a weak light pushing through cloud and smoke. The inn was silent. The keeper had vanished before the fire died. The rider saddled his horse and left the bell behind without daring to look back. The road stretched pale and empty, lined with black thorn trees dripping dew like tears. A figure waited ahead, cloaked in brown, leaning on a staff. He hailed softly, the words swallowed by fog. The stranger lifted his head. A monk's tonsure glimmered faintly beneath his hood. The rider slowed, unease twisting through him. "Peace be with you," the monk said, voice rough from sleeplessness. "Few travel this road and fewer return." The rider nodded, then noticed the parchment bundle at the monk's chest, marked with the same crimson seal as the letter in his own pack. Two men carrying one sin. They rode side by side, the monk silent, until the mist thinned enough to reveal a road shrine toppled in the mud. He dismounted and lifted a cracked icon of a saint whose eyes had been scratched away. "This land remembers what men try to bury," he said. The rider studied the broken stone, feeling the truth of it settle like dust on his tongue. He asked what brought the monk across a road, cursed by so many names. Cendric answered slowly. He carried a letter for the abbot of Rathmore, a confession written in blood, not ink. The rider's hand brushed his own satchel, where the same seal rested. The monk's gaze followed the motion and lingered, understanding unspoken between them. Two bearers of guilt riding toward the same end. They took shelter under a dead oak as thunder grumbled once more across the plain. The monk drew out his letter and unwrapped the oilcloth, revealing parchment stiff with age and red marks that had not faded. The seal bore the same emblem, a circle cleaved by a single sword. It was meant to bind something, he said, but the binding broke. The rider thought of the shadow that rode behind him, and how its whisper always came before the thunder. Perhaps, the monk murmured, we are only the echo of those who broke it first. The rider said nothing. Rain began again, and through its hiss the whisper returned. Two voices now, one his and one the monk's, speaking the same words in perfect unison. You're next. By twilight, they reached a ruined chapel leaning against the hillside. Broken bells lay in grass like fallen moons. Inside, pews lay splintered, altar cracked, yet candles burned without flame, their light pale and raw. The rider stopped at the threshold, unwilling to step further, but the monk walked on as if led by invisible hands. His voice trembled prayers that belonged to older tongues. The shadow's presence thickened near the altar, coiling upward into shapes the eye refused to hold. It hovered above the broken seal carved into the stone. It lives where faith has died, whispered the monk, and it feeds on confession. The rider reached for his dagger, though he knew steel was useless against memory. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the rafters like gray snow. The monk rose, eyes wide with revelation. "This letter was never meant for the abbot," he said. "It was meant for whoever still listens." The rider's heart stilled as his hand brushed his own sealed parchment. Both seals broke at once, the wax splitting without touch. Wind screamed through the chapel, carrying whispers in 1,000 voices. The letters unfolded in their hands, blank except for one new line that burned itself into being. "You carried me." The candles went out, and in the silence that followed, they heard footsteps descending from the altar, not human, not entirely sound. The shadow had learned to walk. The night thickened around the chapel like oil. The rider and the monk fled into the rain, the ruined bells groaning behind them as though protesting the escape. The letters in their hands burned cold, their words shifting like worms beneath the wax. They took shelter among stone graves half sunk in the marsh. The rider's mind spun between guilt and disbelief. If he had carried the curse, had he also birthed it? The monk knelt and whispered that the shadow had no form of its own. It wore the face of the sin it found. Thunder rolled, and when the rider looked down at the shallow water, his reflection was no longer his own. It smiled first, then rose from the pool, perfectly him, dripping black water, eyes alight with knowing cruelty. The reflection stepped from the puddle and circled him with the confidence of a twin who already knew the end. "You left them," it said, his voice sharper, older. "You swore you would return." Each word struck like a blade forged from memory. The monk cried out to resist listening, but the rider could not look away. The reflection listed each sin in rhythm with the rain. Every broken promise, every silence in place of mercy. "I am only what you hid," it whispered, pressing a wet hand to his chest. The rider's breath faltered beneath his skin. Something dark and restless stirred, as if the whisper had found a home. He stumbled back, clutching the letter to his heart, as though paper could bar the truth. The monk lifted his staff and struck the reflection, but the blow passed through water and left only ripples. The shadow laughed. Not cruelly this time, but pitying. "You think you carry me," it said. "But I carry you." The words filled the air with cold. The rider fell to his knees, seeing his hands blur and split like a reflection disturbed by stones. He was fading, the shadow becoming solid. The monk shouted prayers, yet even his voice began to waver, as if the world itself forgot which of them was real. The monk seized the parchment from the rider's grip and tore it. The scream that followed was neither human nor wind. The shadow convulsed, retreating toward the graves, but each torn piece of letter bled smoke that coiled back into its form. The rider rose, realizing the futility. "It cannot be killed," the monk gasped. "Only mirrored again." The rider turned to the reflection and, for the first time, did not flinch. "Then I'll be the mirror," he said. The air darkened around him, the ground cracking like glass beneath their feet. The two figures stepped toward each other until their hands touched, and then merged into one shape that flickered between light and dark, man and shadow, guilt and will. Silence fell as the storm broke apart. When the rain ceased, only the rider remained, or something that wore his face. The monk approached slowly, his staff trembling. "What are you now?" he asked. The rider lifted his eyes, black at the edges, voice calm yet hollow. "The road's memory." He turned toward the east, where Rathmore's mountain spires pierced the dawn haze. The letter fragments lay at his feet, reformed and sealed once more. He mounted his horse without effort, and the animal did not protest. As he rode away, the monk saw his reflection still standing in the puddle, smiling with the same patient promise. "You're next." The road turned silent as bone. No birds sang, no wind stirred. Only the steady rhythm of hooves over cracked stone marked the rider's passage. Behind him, Brother Cendric followed on foot, leaning upon his staff, unwilling to abandon faith or fear. The sky was the color of pewter, the horizon a wound of pale light. The river came into view, wide, black, and still. No bridge spanned it, only a ferry moored to a stake, unmanned yet swaying as if waiting. The rider dismounted and touched the letter sealed once more to his chest. It felt warm, alive, the monk murmured. This is the crossing of the dead. None return unchanged. The rider looked to the far shore, where faint shapes waited. Not men, not entirely shadows. Then we cross, he said, voice steady but empty. The ferry drifted forward without wind, stopping against the bank with a hollow thud. The rider led the horse aboard. The monk followed hesitantly, crossing himself, though no blessing felt near. The ropes coiled like living things, and the ferry began to move. Beneath them, the water was too dark to show reflection, yet it whispered. The faint echo of every voice they had ever known, repeating farewells, confessions, and lies. Midway across, the monk froze. He saw faces just below the surface, mouths opening in perfect silence. They're waiting for me, he whispered. No, said the rider. They're waiting for both of us. The water shivered, and a pale hand brushed the boat's edge. Halfway across, the water thickened, the ferry slowing as if dragged by unseen chains. The monk fell to his knees, clutching the staff and whispering prayers between gasps. From the river's center rose a figure, a woman in tattered veil, her body made of water and sorrow. Her eyes were empty sockets filled with faint light. All who carry guilt must pay, she said, her voice the rush of the current. The rider bowed his head. Then take what is yours. The spirit raised her hand, and the letter at his chest began to smoke. The monk screamed for him to stop, but the rider's gaze stayed fixed. If she takes it, he said, perhaps the road will forget me. The spirit's hand touched his heart, and a deep stillness consumed the air. The ferry stopped moving. All sound died but for one heartbeat that belonged to no living man. The rider's mind filled with images. The warfields he fled. The bodies he left unburied. The promises he broke. Every memory shone and burned away, leaving hollow peace. You think you can trade guilt for freedom, the spirit murmured, but guilt is the bridge between the living and the dead. The rider's voice trembled. Then let me carry it, but let them rest. She paused, her light flickering, and withdrew her hand. So long as you remember, they will not rise again. The ferry lurched forward once more, lighter than before. The ferry touched the far shore. The spirit dissolved with the ripples, and the whispers fell silent. The rider stepped onto dry ground that felt too still, too hollow. The monk followed, trembling but alive. Alive. Is it done? He asked. The rider looked to the horizon. The towers of Rathmore rising from fog like the teeth of a dead god. Not yet, he said. The road remembers, but it does not forgive. He mounted his horse and turned toward the city. As the monk watched, the rider's shadow stretched long behind him, moving out of rhythm with his steps. It lifted its head once, as if breathing, before following quietly after. The road climbed toward Rathmore's gates, winding through fields turned gray with frost. The rider's cloak dragged through shallow snow, leaving a dark trail behind. The monk followed at a distance, coughing prayers into his sleeves. The city walls loomed high, carved with holy runes long faded by neglect. Bells rang faintly, their tones brittle as old bones. The rider felt the letter burn again against his chest, though he knew it should have turned to ash. A watchman called from above, but received no answer. The gates creaked open by themselves, slow and grudging, as if the city already knew what was coming. He entered alone. Behind him, the shadow stepped through the snow without leaving prints. Inside the city, the streets were empty. Doors barred, shutters closed, torches unlit. Even dogs dared not bark. The rider guided his horse to the great abbey, its spires piercing the clouds like broken spears. The doors hung ajar, their hinges screaming softly as he entered. Candlelight flickered within, though none had tended the wicks in days. The air smelled of iron and incense. of death masked by devotion. He dismounted and walked the aisle toward the altar where the abbot once preached. His letter pulsed with faint light, as though it recognized its destination. The monk lingered at the door, trembling. "Something here already answered," he whispered. The altar was draped in torn cloth, and upon it sat the abbot, or what remained of him. His robes were pristine, his body upright, but his skin pale as wax, eyes hollow. The rider stopped short. The monk fell to his knees and wept, realizing prayer had arrived too late. The air around them thickened. From the abbot's empty sockets drifted tendrils of black smoke that rose and joined above the altar, forming a single shape. The shadow took its place, now fully formed, its voice filling every corner of the hall. "I was the message," it said. "You only carried the echo." The rider felt the truth strike him. He had never been sent to deliver the letter. He was the letter, sealed long ago with the curse he carried still. The rider drew his dagger, though he knew it was folly. "If I am the letter," he said, "then I will end the message." The shadow smiled, echoing every movement a heartbeat before he made it. They circled the altar like mirrored flames. The monk cried out, warning him to stop, but the rider lunged. The blade struck through air, meeting its twin as the shadow reached forward. Their forms collided, neither solid nor spirit. For a moment, both faces merged. The man and the memory, and the abbey erupted with wind. Candles burst, banners tore free, bells screamed in their towers. When the air stilled, only one figure stood, cloaked in both light and dark, eyes neither mortal nor damned. When silence returned, the rider lowered his dagger. The shadow was gone, yet its voice lingered within him, calm, patient, eternal. The monk approached, tears streaking the dust on his face. "Is it over?" he asked. The rider looked to the open doors where dawn began to touch the snow. "It's quieter," he said. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing through the hollow nave. As he passed beneath the threshold, the bells above the abbey began to ring, clear and full for the first time in years. Their sound followed him onto the road. The last words whispered within the chime, soft as breath against his ear. "Who rides next?" He did not look back.